Hello and welcome to this MithrilMoney Securities Investment 101 course. This is the second part. We're going to get straight into things here. We just need to clarify a couple of things about shares and bonds. So let's have a company, and we'll have a company, and it's to make my drawing life easy. It's just got 8 shares, and here's one share here, a piece of paper which represents that much control or ownership of that organisation there. Okay, and this is owned by a happy chappy here, who currently owns this paper share. Now, there's a few things that this person, where this person differs from, say, a bond. Let's draw the bond situation. Okay, so there's some debt capital which is owed by the company to various people. And there are various people out in the world who own bits of paper which have a claim to this amount of debt. So this person here owns this piece of paper, and this piece of paper is a bond, and it's representing that amount of debt. There's a few different things going on here. The first different thing is that over here we do have this share of ownership. And we do receive dividends, but the dividends are variable. You might get them, you might not get them, you don't know how much you're going to get. It all depends on how much profits, how many profits the company is making, how much it's earning on its investments, how much it then decides to pay out of its profits to you. So those dividends there are variable, so you cannot be certain of the amount of money you're going to get. However, most debt typically is called fixed income. This piece of paper will have a number written on it, say $100, and the bond will have been issued with a certain percentage, say 7.5%. So this person knows, unless the company goes horribly wrong, they're going to get, say, $7.50 every year. That has to be paid to them as long as the company exists. Now, if it doesn't get paid to them, they can then sue the company. Now, if the company goes horribly wrong, this person over here owns this share. You know, they can't hand the share back and say to the company, "Give me £100 or give me $100." They are, you know, they are sharing in the losses as well as sharing in the profits of the company. So, you know, they just don't know. And also, even worse than that, each one of these shares will have a face value, let's say $1. And if the company goes bust, this person here will owe $1 to the company's creditors. If they've got 1,000 shares with a face value of $1, they will owe $1,000. So they are liable up to usually a limited amount of money. On the other hand, this person here, if they don't receive their $100 at the end, so they're supposed to be getting $100, let's say in 10 years, 10 years comes and goes and they don't get their $100, again, they can sue the company for the missing amount of money. So you pays your money, it takes your choice. What do you want to do? Do you want to buy shares or do you want to buy bonds? They've got these different kinds of characteristics. It's up to you what you want to do with the different things. Now, both shares and bonds share another feature. It's called whether they are bearer securities or whether they are registered securities. It's probably easier if I draw a registered security first. Okay, so registered security is, here's the company again. Here's our paper share, and here's Mr. Smith, who owns that paper share. Let's say the share has an ID number 007, and that share represents that much ownership of the company. There will be a book in which, so we'll put his name down here, Agent Smith, and he's got 1 share. There will be a book held by a company registrar, and in the book there will be an entry, and the entry will say Agent Smith 1 share 007. So if any naughty person, any burglar, let's draw a burglar with the old traditional mask, whoop, and a beret obviously, and a stripy t-shirt. If this burglar should come along and nick the share and run away with it, okay, Agent Smith's okay because Agent Smith's in the book. And if this person turns up at the AGM saying, I've got a share, I'm going to vote, the authorities will be on them and they'll say, no, you're not the owner. The owner is Agent Smith. So this is, you know, a registered share. And of course, governments like these for 2 reasons. One, it means they can settle the contractual disputes in courts a bit more easily than otherwise. And the second thing, of course, is that if they say that you owe them tax, they can look in a book, they can see that you own the share, they can look at the dividends, they can look at the capital growth, and they can hand you a tax bill. Now, you get other kinds of securities which are bearer securities. Now, a bearer security, I want you to think of, let's say, a £5 note. So here's a £5 note. Now, this used to represent, in the good old days, 1.25 ounces of gold. And if you went to the Bank of England and produced a £5 note and no one was banging at the door saying, stop thief, and the police were saying you've just stolen that £5 note, you would be given 1.25 ounces of gold. So if this thief here, if our little thief friend, managed to nick the note and then kind of slip over here, and if our friend Agent Smith didn't notice that £5 note disappearing from their pocket, then this thief here could go to the Bank of England. I've drawn that right, the old lady of Threadneedle Street there, with some pillars and doors and so on. Present that and get 1.25 ounces of gold and walk away because they were bearing the paper certificate which represented an 1.25 ounces of gold. And of course, governments don't like bearer documents, bearer securities, because they're easier to avoid paying tax on and more difficult to settle contractual and legal disputes upon. However, there are still some examples of these things, and the two that we'll typically talk about are Eurobonds, a particular kind of bond, and American Depository Receipts, or ADRs, which we'll come to in a later video. So the physical security of the £5 note is more difficult to trace, and the governments don't like these bearer things because they say that people like money launderers and other people governments don't like will be attracted to using these things to wash their money. Okay, so let's move on then to various kinds of different shares. So let's get back to Agent Smith again. So we'll just copy Agent Smith there and have a new diagram. There's Agent Smith. Now, what kind of piece of paper has Agent Smith got there? Now, usually it will be an ordinary share. And an ordinary share means he can vote in AGMs and things. And also he will receive dividends. Now, sometimes we can have A shares and B shares, ordinary shares, and we can have all sorts of different shares. Each kind of exchange and each kind of country will have different kinds of things here. So we'll do an example of that later on in these videos. But different shares, you know, there might be A shares, there might be B shares. Sometimes the A shares can't vote, sometimes the B shares can't vote. It depends which country you're in. Some shares get more votes. It's all dependent upon circumstance. But occasionally you also get a thing called a redeemable share. And a redeemable share is a share that you can hand back to the company and say, give me some money, which might be printed on there. So, you know, you can hand the redeemable shares back. The company says, okay, this time we are going to redeem a face value on here. And that might be particularly attractive to, say, venture capital people who might want to be able to hand back those shares. But what's a particular kind of share that most people have heard of, although they aren't too clear on the details, is preference shares. Now these are a little bit like bonds. The reason why is because they're a kind of strange kind of what do you call it, hybrid version of shares and bonds. Why? Because a preference share will have on it a fixed percentage, let's say 7.5%. And if you remember, Agent Smith doesn't necessarily get a definite dividend. A preference shareholder will, if there is enough money to go round. Now remember, the bondholders have to be paid their interest. The preference shareholder doesn't have to be paid their 7.5% on the face value. So with a face value of $1, they'd have to get 7.5 cents every year if there was any money to be given out. Now, one of the things here is if you don't give the preference shareholders their due 7.5%, Agent Smith here, who's holding the ordinary share, will definitely get nothing. So that's why preference shareholders are called preferred shareholders, because they get paid first. And poor old Agent Smith over here gets paid second. And the preference shareholder will be getting a fixed amount generally, which will be written down on the preference share, 7.5% of a face value. Notice, of course, they don't necessarily have to have paid $1 for that share. They could have paid 1 cent for that preference share. They could have paid $100 for that preference share. They will get 7.5% of the face value. Here's another weird thing. Remember I said Agent Smith gets to vote. There's his little hand voting. There's his little hand voting. Our friend here, we'll call him Neo, doesn't get to vote. Okay, so no vote. So has to hold his hands down by his sides. Okay, doesn't get to vote in company meetings unless they haven't been paid for a long time. Let's say they're supposed to get paid once every year, and it will be determined in the company's kind of registration documents in each particular country how long it is that they're not paid, that they can then go and vote in the company's AGM. So let's say a typical case would be if that preference shareholder there, Neo, hasn't been paid anything for 3 years, they will be able to go to the AGM and vote. Now what they'll typically do is sack the board and replace them with people who promise to pay all the preference share dividends out, which have kind of built up over time. But here's the thing, preference shareholders don't normally get to vote, which goes against what I would have originally said. Preference, surely that means they get more votes. No, it doesn't. It means they get paid first. Now, the other reason that they're preferred is this. If a company should go bust, so here's our company, and let's say this company does go bust, and there's some amount of money left in the company, who gets paid first? Now, there is what's called a liquidation ranking, and at the top of the ranking are bondholders, or basically debt holders. So all debts must be cleared before we get down to shareholders. Now the shareholders will divide into 2 main groups, the preference shareholders and the poor old ordinary shareholders. So we basically go down from the top and we go down to the bottom. So we start with a pile of money. Let's do a little treasure chest. It's not a very good treasure chest, but it'll do. So inside there's some treasure. And that's left, and if the company's gone bust, it owes £10 million. There's £3 million in the kitty. Well, we'll pay off the bondholders, and we'll come down here. Now the order is called Seniority. So at the top here we have the senior bondholders, and we get more and more junior as we go down. So think of a table, a dinner table. There are older people who get fed first, and then the younger people get fed last from a pile of food. So we'll go down through the seniority of the bonds, and then the preference shares are more senior than the ordinary shares. So in the event of a company liquidation or company going bust, the preference shareholders once again are preferred. So they are preferred in this liquidation ranking. Now we're going to see this liquidation ranking again and again as we go through the course. But I think that's probably enough for the moment. So see you again in the next lecture. And once again, if you want to get in contact with MithrilMoney to arrange some private financial training, just contact us at the address in the YouTube show notes.